From the Oregon State University Extension Service, this is Pollination, a podcast that tells the stories of researchers, land managers, and concerned citizens making bold strides to improve the health of pollinators. I'm your host, Dr. Adoni Melathopoulos, Assistant Professor in Pollinator Health in the Department of Horticulture.
Integrated pest management is often held up as a great way to protect pollinators on managed lands, but frequently it's kind of held out as a bit of an abstract concept. So we have this series that's been supported by the Western IPM Center called What the Heck Does IPM Mean in some very specific cases. Now, we have previous episodes based in Oregon, one in commercial blueberry production and nursery production, and this week we turn our attention to New Mexico, the heart of Albuquerque to be exact. We're going to be speaking today with Casey Holland, who is the farm manager at Chispas Farm, which is a 4-acre urban farm. They grow 120 varieties of fruits and vegetables, and they also have a flock of milk goats and grazing sheep and hens and ducks and geese, and you're going to see how all of these parts together create a wonderful systems approach to managing pests, and with all sorts of opportunities for nectar and pollen, not only for pollinators, but the beneficial insects that sort of are the motor that drives integrated pest management. This is a great episode, especially if you're in New Mexico, but even if you're not in New Mexico, just to see how you can bring all the pieces together and really, truly integrate pest management. This week on Pollination. Well, I'm so excited to have you on Pollination this week, Casey.
Thank you for having me.
So tell us a little bit about the farm. It sounds like a really remarkable farm, a really great example of where integrated pest management and pollinator protection come together. Tell us about the farm. What do you do in the farm?
Yeah, so the farm itself is about 4 acres. We are not certified organic. However, we used to be, and there's a whole bunch of political stuff that went into that. But so we really approach the farm from how do we make the soil, the people, and all of the more than human beings that share the space as healthy as possible. So to do that, we cultivate a little under 2 acres in active vegetables and fruits. So that's like tomatoes, peppers, cabbage, all those kinds of things. We have about 1 acre that's utilized in perennial pasture for our livestock. So we keep a herd of milk goats, a flock of sheep, over 100 laying hens, and ducks and geese. And I'd love to talk about how they're also really vital in pest management later on. And we grow for a large CSA program that we run of over 60 families. We go to the largest farmers market in Albuquerque called the Downtown Growers Market. And we host a number of different free cooking classes and music times and things on the farm in order to help people be involved in the farm as much as possible, in addition to different workshops and stuff that we do. So yeah, we've always got a lot of a little bit of everything going on at any given time.
Wow. I was just thinking that could work in favor of IPM and pollinators, because it's a very complex operation, but also I imagine at the same time there's a lot of logistics. I can imagine you're out weeding a row and then the public shows up and you got to do these kind of transitions. Tell us a little bit about the challenges of having a really good sustainable farm that's so public facing.
Oh yeah, I also live on the farm, which is its own set of delineation between what is farm and who am I. So that's constantly a line that is attempted to be blurred. I think one of the things that's really sweet that I've really been focusing on, not just for myself, but again for the pollinators, is this whole idea of systems and structures of support and what actually is sustainable. And we have a pretty decently sized crew this year that's helping support all of the work that we're doing. And I'm kind of I'm the infield person working with the crew, and I'm also kind of the logistical manager. So what's kind of fun is that I kind of set the priorities for the week and everything. We're implementing them as we go, harvesting, planting, weeding, whatever that date calls for. And then I am training a couple of the folks who work with me to also be able to engage with the public and who speak really well about the work that we're doing. So sometimes if I'm there, I'll be able to be like just literally the other day, we had 2 community members. One of them's a mom of like one of our CSA members who were taking a walk in the neighborhood and decided they wanted to stop by the farm, and we're in the middle of the harvest. So I'm able to like peel away and welcome them because I want everybody to feel welcome when they come. And like, what's really nice is that we've really clearly delineated kind of paths for folks and stuff. So I was able to give them a brief introduction, say hi, welcome, and then allow them to kind of take like a self-guided tour and chatted with them a little bit because everyone always asks about all the flowers that we've got growing and what they're about, and kind of give them a little bit of a taste of what's up, and then invite them to come back during one of our more formal open days or when we have the free cooking classes and a more intentional space to engage. And now more and more members of the crew are feeling empowered that if someone does walk up and they want to know what's going on, they can stop what they're doing and chat for a little bit and say, hey, and then go back to it. So it's this kind of nice balance of, we typically do try to always make time for the folks and then plug them into existing initiatives or times where we do specifically have the farm open for folks to come and chat and talk. And in that way, we kind of weave in a number of different folks from the community and neighborhood into our work. And it happens almost every day. It really does, where somebody comes up and wants to know what's going on. I can imagine. The other day, even a FedEx worker, who lives in the area, stopped by and dropped off a package and wanted to sit and chat about what was going on, which is just a really fun thing too, I think, about being such an urban farm as well. Yeah, and I guess that is a great unlike a farm that isn't public facing, you're able to introduce people to pollinators and sustainable issues. You're sort of on the front lines of kind of making that bridge. Yeah, and I'm like a huge nerd specifically about all of the wasps we have on the farm. I think they're fascinating. I love them. So it's really, really sweet to like be able to share that with folks. And oftentimes people just think of wasps as like this kind of annoyance at a picnic or something. And I'm like, no, you have no idea how integral they are to operations here actually, and how like cool they really can be. So it's fun too to like have our own special interests that we can share too whenever folks come. I always think, people always, when it comes to wasps, they think yellow jackets, and they really don't understand how much wasp diversity. Like I always think with bees, it's like, oh, people think honeybees and they don't know that. But really when it comes to wasps, I think nobody thinks, probably very few people would identify with the small wasps that are going after your aphids or, that you can only see by their side effects that they leave behind. That's right. Yeah. So cool. Yeah. Well, tell me a little bit about how you are able to attract these beneficials, including bees. You talked about having, specific pollinator habitat, but when we were talking before the episode, you mentioned that also the cropping area is it's turned into habitat. Tell us a little bit about that. Yeah, so it's extremely integrated, which I think is the idea of integrated pest management. And it's like multifaceted in a bunch of different ways. So one of the primary ways is anytime for active cultivation, I plant dill or cilantro. I always plan in the crop plan to allow those beds to grow and flower and fully develop, primarily because they are such hotspots and beneficial insects love those flowers to death. And because I let that happen, what happens is they go to seed and then they spit seed everywhere. And then every year since, I think we did our first planting of dill and carrots in 2018 in the fields. And we've never needed to really plant them again for the insects. So in easily a 30, 40-foot spread where that bed was, every year they kind of further and like stretch out and spread. So then in following years, like this year, we have a bed of kale that we planted, 2 beds of kale, and it is thick with carrots that have all gone to bloom too. So it's this big riot of these big carrot flowers. Earlier in the spring, we had all the dill coming up. So it's almost like, I like those better than any other firework, all these dill explosions and carrot explosions. And it's really cool because then we planted the kale there. And I wasn't necessarily thinking of this when I did the crop plan. But kale is one of our crops that gets the most attacked by like cabbage loopers and other caterpillars and things like that. So all of these wasps come to hunt or to drink nectar on the carrots and everything and on the dill. And then they in turn, are hunting our caterpillars straight off of the plants. And you can watch them carrying them away or having epic aerial battles with each other in the sky as they like pull them to the ground. And then as they spread, like now we have almost 60 feet away. I've never planted carrots in this field and I've never seen them come up before. But thanks to in the wintertime, we allow all of our livestock to come graze all the fields.
Mm-hmm.
The chickens are eating all the seeds and kind of pooping mountain places. So they are now spreading cosmos, the dill, the carrots in fields completely away from where I've ever planted them. And then I've trained the crew early in the year to intentionally leave them whenever we see them as weeds. As long as they're not super interfering or right up next to a plant, I figure why not have a beautiful cosmo or why not have a beautiful carrot flower come up? So in that way, they're like really just like in our tomatoes, we've got some, in our sweet potatoes, we've got some, just kind of all over. And it makes it easier to integrate too, because once we planted them, if we let them flower, we like never need to intentionally plant them again. I can guarantee you hundreds are going to be eager to come up every year. And those are just ones that we kind of free let go to seed. We also intentionally plant flower beds every year of marigolds, zinnias. Every year I try to plant more perennial cut flowers too. So we've got over 100-foot bed of gladiolas, echinacea, rudbeckia, all kinds of different perennial medicinal plants that we plant on the edge spaces, very similar to a hedgerow, but like a smaller strip that then also bloom for longer periods. And just, I find, the more diversity of flowers, the more diversity of insects that we're welcoming onto the farm. Every single year, I see things that I've never seen before. And this is my 11th season. And it's just like, it's almost a challenge at this point to see what more we can grow. And like I was telling you before the show, how else we can integrate longer bloom periods onto the farm, because really it's only ever benefited us in all these really wonderful ways. And the beauty, I can't even tell you, like this time of year when everything's in bloom, and we were prepping some fields today, rotating, flail mowing and power harrowing some beds from onions to get into it. And you could see all these dragonflies, like dozens of them flying above where we were working because of all the little bugs, I think, that were coming up from the work that we were doing. And then sometimes there's these like swallowtails and things that will come and swoop in on a particular moist morning. And I'm always the kind of person that's just like, y'all, we got to stop and just watch this for a second. Like, isn't this so cool? Like how amazing that like the work that we're doing is actually supporting all of these other beautiful beings. And we just happen to be doing the work that we were going to do anyway on like a regular Thursday, right? But then you can see everyone just having a party in the sky, feasting off of everything that's grown. It's really sweet. Yeah.
It really does kind of give a fuller meaning to the idea of integrated pest management, and that you really have, the row, you've got plants growing together. There's a lot of companion plant interactions happening almost intentionally, but in some cases just happening. And buckwheat is another one that I didn't even mention. We planted buckwheat once 2 years ago, and now we have buckwheat that comes up readily in almost every field. And that's another like incredible soil builder, but the beneficial insects just love those little cup flowers, those little white cup flowers. Oh, it's so cool. And where does it stop? I don't know. More and more every year, I'm in. You were mentioning as well the livestock. You mentioned that they're moving plants around, and that's been, they've been helping you establish plants on the farm.
Like patches of different beneficial plants all over the farm. Yeah, and I would say the first year we integrated chickens into the farm. So once everything dies for the frost, we kind of just let the chickens have complete free reign and they're able to go. Once we actually started letting them out and eat bugs all winter long, it was incredible to see the amount of pest pressure that was reduced just from the chickens alone. And we also have all these sunflowers and different like amaranth and big stemmed items. And when we let the goats and sheep graze, they go and they clean all the stems and the stalks, and they're eating a lot of the ground, and they're fertilizing for us and everything. And one thing that I realized, which I hadn't even thought of before, they never eat the big tough stems. But my partner was gathering them to make a fence, and you could literally watch all of these overwintering like native bees and things emerging from the stems that were left all winter since we leave that cover as it was getting warm enough to be able to come out. So we're getting fertilizer, we're feeding, they're almost like cleaning the stems, leaving them for the beneficial insects. And the chickens are around hunting squash bugs and things all winter.
So the nice elegant thing that you discovered there is that the stems that are too big for the livestock to graze down become nesting bees, and stem nesting bees and wasps will start to move in And so you get
Yep.
this. Yeah. That's really wonderful.
And I hadn't even anticipated that component of leaving all the field debris on the farm for the livestock to graze, is that also we're leaving habitat all winter long.
That is fantastic. Well, tell us a little bit as well about, you were mentioning that one of your goals is to try and fill some of the flowering gaps. Where are the gaps, and what's been the challenge there?
Yeah, I'd say the flowering gaps are like our coldest months. So December, January, end of November, beginning of February are definitely the hardest time to keep blooms going. How we're trying to address that actually is looking at the house space and other edge spaces around the farm that aren't in active cultivation with annuals mostly, and trying to figure out what kind of native perennials can we plant. Like winter fat, I think, is something around here that like blooms really heavily in the winter. Like how do we integrate that into the literal landscaping in order to provide more areas of habitat? Or we have like these hedgerows that we've planted along the road fences and along our acequia fence. Mm-hmm. How do we do more research and figure out? Because really it's just like we have such a broad bloom window that so much is already going on that you really need a really tough adapted plant to be able to survive when sometimes we can get in the negative zeros, as cold as, or as hot in December. Sometimes it'll be an 80-degree day. So it's something that's got to be really adapted to our high desert region that can handle the extremes. So utilizing those kind of empty edge spaces and immediately around the house to try to build that habitat is one of the things we're doing to try to address that.
Well, speaking about extremes, I imagine right now, under drought conditions, being really hot, are there any pollinator plants that really perform well in New Mexico at this time of year, right in the depths of the summer?
Oh, everything. I mean, marigolds are going, the zinnias are off the charts. The early cosmos that seeded themselves around the farm, they're in full bloom. The carrots right now are just like living their best freaking lives. Honestly, the heat makes a lot of things bolt. Uh-huh. So that's when we start getting, all of our spring crops we left for a little longer when all the radishes were blooming and the turnips had started to go. It's like, oh, we'll leave those for a little while and let them go. The heat encourages things to flower, I think, as long as we give them enough water for them to like make it through. They just thrive. Like the echinacea is like easily, some of it's 5 feet tall now with like dozens and dozens of those bright purple cone flowers. And the rudbeckia is like the biggest one I've ever seen. It's like 4 feet wide by like 4 feet tall. That's just like got hundreds of blooms all over it. They thrive in the heat. I think really it's the alternating between hot and cold, sometimes a 40-degree difference in one day on those edge seasons when the cold starts setting in or when the warm is just setting in. That is the hardest for something to really adapt. And that's where I'm looking more at native plants because they are regionally adapted and are like, cool,
can deal with those extremes.
Freeze and then get all the way to 70 degrees the following day. Those are the ones that are like resilient and fill those edge spaces more than like my delicate little food babes we're planting everywhere.
I guess the last question I have is you talked about the challenges with the pollinators and kind of filling in some gaps and approaches to it. But are there any pest problems that, in spite of the system working, become a problem? How have you kind of dealt with them?
Yeah, I'd say there's one that any farmer in this region will tell you right away. It's just like the bane of all of our existences, and that's a squash bug. Mm-hmm. And I've heard rumors of a hoverfly that will parasitize the eggs. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what I got to plant to invite that friend here, but I would love to do that. I'm like every year I'm just like crawling around hoping that I see a parasitized squash bug egg. But really, a lot of people try to like plant marigolds or plant late, and really, I'm just like they're going to be there no matter what. So with those more pervasive pests, my strategy is the classic pick and squish, as I like to call it. So we kind of religiously 3 times a week go through with our human hands and remove the eggs and squish whatever bugs we can find. And most of the time, we can win the battle. And then now with a changing climate, it's been interesting. We're getting waves of insects and bugs that we've never had in this area before. So the latest one is like the bagrata bug. and also the harlequin beetle. They're really big fans of brassicas.
Mm-hmm.
And there hasn't been time for any predator here to really figure out how to eat them. And I would not advise anyone just introduce a predator from wherever they're naturally from, because who knows what that could do to the ecosystem. So that's another, they don't really respond to organic intervention as far as like neem oil or pyrethrum even, because they're just like tough. And I try to avoid that as much as possible anyway. It's just extra expense on the farm. So we really do, even for those, just the classic pick and squish.
Yeah, I suppose that has always been a problem. You have a nicely balanced system, and then either through climate change or an invasive pest or disease comes in, and then it kind of throws things out of whack that can be challenging to, adapt to those.
Yeah, and there's some physical interventions, things like crop rotation, right? Like I'm not going to let the squash bugs and the harlequin bugs and all of that have the same crop planted in the same space every year. Then I'm just planting them a buffet,
Mm-hmm.
So we do try our best to plant in as many different locations as possible in order to help at least make the plants harder to find that they're trying to target to eat. And then there's also, I've recently invested in some insect netting. So that way, when the plants are small, we can cover them and help them get to the size where then they can kind of handle some pest pressure when they get a little larger, and always trying to get the reusable things. So thankfully this insect netting I've had is like on year 3 and it's thriving, and we're going to be able to keep using it. But there are some things that other than just us intervening, we can. There was actually, thinking about it, I was thinking recently, we planted tomatillos for the first time in a long time this year. And I hadn't planted them because there was this horrible black slug or something that would come on and just devour them all. I was convinced by the crew to plant them this year, and I was a little anxious. I was getting worried. I didn't know what would happen. And we went out to weed them about a month after planting, and I was like, oh no, the bugs are here. Like, oh no, what's happening? They're coming back, like all my trauma relived. And our crew member, Raina, was paying attention and looking and trying to find where they were. And she found, what we found out is a spined soldier bug, an insect I've never even seen before. Straight up proboscis deep in, like pest bug. And I was celebrating because I guess they're really uncommon. And just through the habitat that we've been able to build, this like pest that at past farms was like horrendous, and I stopped planting this crop completely, it was there. And it looked like the plants were getting eaten and devoured. We waited another week, and these spine soldier bugs that, again, who knows where they came from, we just had the habitat, have handled it brilliantly, and the plants recovered. They're huge. They're almost too big now. We probably ought to trellis them in hindsight, but it's really fun too to see just like things work that haven't worked before in other places, or insects that you find out are actually pretty uncommon in our region, that because we have the habitat and the soil practices and the integration that we do, all of a sudden are like there and finding a pretty happy home for themselves too. So.
I guess that's a lesson for people, is just to, I was, as soon as you see aphids or something, not to freak out, just wait. Oftentimes, especially if you have enough biodiversity on the farm, it usually gets eaten up by somebody.
That's been a lesson I've learned, honestly. You get right to the edge of where you think you're going to lose it. And that's typically when everything shows up, because like a beneficial insect, you could be planting flowers all day, and if they don't have food for their young, they're not going to stick around. If they don't have food to eat, they're not going to stick around. So if you've got an aphid-free area, well, then what are the ladybugs even going to eat? Or what are the lacewings going to come hunt? Like you do need a balance. And that's what it's all about. Like I do allow some damage on the crops. And when people ask about it at the market, I like to joke that it's proof we're organic.
Mm-hmm.
When you see something that looks so spotless and so like it hasn't been involved or it's been grown in a vacuum, it probably has in a sense. And it's when you actually allow some of those systems and those life cycles to actually fill themselves that then you start seeing like, oh yeah, like actually it was fine. I just had to like be uncomfortable for like a week and then it was handled.
Fantastic, Casey. Thanks so much for taking time to talk with us today. This is, I think you guys are doing really practicing high-level integrated pest management and pollinator protection, and it's a real wonderful to share your story with our listeners.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And if folks want to learn more about the farm, we have a website, chispasfarm.com. We've got an Instagram, a Facebook, all of these things. I can share the specific notes with you later to be included in whatever show notes you've got. And just really looking forward to engaging with folks. And if you're in the area, come by and say hi.
Oh, yes. Thanks for reminding me. All of this material will be in the show notes. So take a look. And thank you again for taking time to talk with us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening. The show is produced by Quinn Sin and Neal, who's a student here at OSU in the New Media Communications program, and the show wouldn't even be possible without the support of the Oregon Legislature, the Foundation for Food and Agricultural Research, and Western SARE. Show notes with links mentioned on each episode are available on the website, which is at pollinationpodcast.oregonstate.edu. I also love hearing from you, and there's several ways to connect with me. The first one is you can visit the website and leave an episode-specific comment. You can suggest a future guest or topic, or ask a question that could be featured in a future episode. But you can do the same things on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook by visiting the Oregon Bee Project. Thanks so much for listening, and see you next week.